So welcome everyone. It's 12:45. Let's start. I see that already many people joined, and it's a great pleasure to have for today's DCR lecture Professor Leonhard Held from the University of Zurich, and he will talk about the reanalysis and reuse of clinical trial data, which I'm very excited about. Before we go to our main part of today, let me briefly share some updates with you. So a short advertisement about the next upcoming DCR lecture in August. So we'll have a break in July. So the next one will be end of August 26, where we have Professor Meinl from neurology talking about the DO-IT trial in stroke. So make sure to register for that. And then in the following terms, in the next semester, we have also some speakers which might be familiar for you. So we have Lum talking about target trial emulation. Then we have Professor Scheidecker from the Psychiatry Uni Hospital in Zurich talking about clinical trials with psychedelics, which is a very fascinating research field also. And then in November, we have Professor Ports from Bern, who will talk about ethics and clinical trials. Then a reminder that the Day of Clinical Research is in December this year, on 1st of December. Make sure to register. We have Professor Gordon Guyatt as one of the keynote speakers, which is like one of the big guys. He coined the term evidence-based medicine. So make sure not to miss this one and register early to save your spot. Then we have an upcoming medical grant writing course next semester starting in October. These are 3 sessions where I'm also lecturing how to write a good grant proposal to acquire third-party funding. So if you're interested in that, you can get in touch and make sure to save the spot. We expect that this course will fill up quite quickly based on prior experiences with this course. Then some other courses which are upcoming, like the GCP courses, fundamental statistics, and we also have now PPI courses and RedCap courses, which are actually today and tomorrow. So if you're up for a spontaneous course, I think you can still register for them. Make sure to check your GCP validity, which is important. So you need to update your GCP certificate from time to time, that you're eligible still to run trials. So make sure to check this. And again, already thanks for joining, and make sure to follow us and get in touch if you have any questions. And this brings me to the main part of the lecture. It's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Leonhard Held. He's the professor and chair of biostatistics at the University of Zurich, and he's also the director of the Center for Reproducible Research and Research Synthesis, a competence center at the University of Zurich dedicated to reproducible science and research synthesis, where I have actually been working at before I came to Bern. And Leo's work focuses on methodological aspects of clinical trials, preclinical trials, and also epidemiological studies. And he's a big advocate for reproducibility, replicability studies, and also the FAIR data principles, which is, I think, a very important thing that we spread the word more about these principles. And today he will talk about a recent publication which just came out, I think, in Trials, which is about the reanalysis and reuse of clinical trial data. So if you have if you want to have more detailed insights, I guess you can also check out the publication, and I'm sure Leo will dig deeper into that. So the stage is yours, Leo. Thank you for taking time today already.
Thank you, Benjamin, for having me and inviting me. I hope you can hear me.
I hear you well, yes.
Wonderful. And I'm going to share my slides. I think you have to stop sharing first.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
By the way, we have a record number of registrations today. So
Wow, I feel honored. Great. Can you see my slides?
yes,
Right. So, yeah, Benjamin mentioned a few of those hats I wear already, which are listed here on page 1. So, I don't go through that in detail. My talk is split into 2 parts. In the first part, I give a bit more general discussion of sharing clinical trial data. And then in the second part, I talk about this case study that Benjamin already mentioned in the intro. So sharing clinical trial data is a controversial topic. And I guess you know that not much data from clinical trials are shared. Certainly not openly, but there are some increasingly numbers of trials which can be accessed with restricted access. That was even worse 20 years ago. And here's a comment by Andrew Wickers, who asks the question, whose data set is it anyway? Because the common perception at the time, and perhaps still, is that the data is owned by the PI who runs the trial, but that's actually disputed. And some people argue the data are owned by the patient or maybe by the public who funds your research, but certainly not by the PI. Anyway, Andrew concludes that the clinical trial community needs to improve data sharing. Otherwise, we will only strengthen the public perception that we do clinical trials to benefit ourselves and not our patients. So I think that was a wake-up call. Of course, we know that clinical trial data is sensitive, and the usual concern, and I think it's a justifiable concern, is that you don't want to anonymize patients. You don't want to make patient data available, and then that is certainly not a good idea. And so, in a sense, not sharing data is in the interest of the patient. However, actually, in preparing this talk, I found this very interesting survey, which was published 8 years ago in the New England Journal of Medicine, where these authors actually asked nearly 1,000 trial participants about their perception sharing clinical trial data. And you see a few quotes from the paper here. I just read 1 or 2 sentences to you. A total of 93% were very or somewhat likely to allow their own data to be shared with university scientists, and 82% were very or somewhat likely to share with scientists and for-profit companies. So there's actually a large willingness among patients to share their data, and they are actually not so concerned about the potential risks of data sharing. I thought that was quite an interesting survey that I found while preparing this talk. One reason why you might want to share clinical trial data is that maybe there's an error in your analysis. And then maybe a reproduction would detect that error. And that actually happened in a quite interesting study a few years ago, which was published in JAMA 2018, where the interest was in the effect of a prevention program for COPD patients. And the original publication then reported significantly fewer COPD-related hospitalizations and emergency department visits with this intervention compared to control. So basically the output the investigators wanted to have. Now the story goes on. The investigators then, a few months later, wanted to do some secondary analysis with the same data set, and actually found out that they screwed up the coding of the 2 groups. So they mixed treatment and control in the analysis, and And they were honest enough to report this back to the journal. And then actually a correction was published roughly a year later, where you see, the abstract down here, which now states there are significantly greater COPD-related hospitalizations and emergency department visits, and that this is an unanticipated finding. Right? So errors can happen. We are all human. We make errors, and making maybe data available helps to detect such errors. And by the way, when I talk of data, I also mean code. So data and code should be available to reproduce study findings. Actually, a nice aspect of this study is that they actually asked two biostatisticians to do the analysis, the whole analysis of the paper in parallel, independently. And those biostatisticians, of course, detected that one error, but they also detected another error in a secondary outcome. So there was also something else wrong, which had to be corrected in this revised paper. So I think that convincingly shows that making data and code available just for checking the validity of the results might be a good thing. And already roughly 10 years ago, in this editorial, the editor of Annals of Oncology concluded is that the question is not whether data should be shared, but rather how we can usher in responsible methods for doing so. And of course, you cannot share clinical trial data openly. You have to make it available with restricted access, and I'll come to that later. Right. What's the reality in data sharing? There's quite an interesting, large systematic review which has been published a few years ago, 2023, in the BMJ, which is more general about the whole field of medical and health sciences. And so that's a review of papers that already have a meta perspective and look at the percentage of data shared in medical publications. And they actually found more than 100 such papers and synthesized the evidence from those more than 100 studies in this meta, or if you wish, meta-analysis. And they distinguish declared prevalence. So that's if in the paper it is declared that data will be made available, from actual prevalence. And you see the percentages are very low. Declared prevalence in this meta-analysis was 8%, of course, with some uncertainty, and the actual prevalence that the data was actually available was just 2%. And what you see in this figure here is also trends over time, and they found this quite interesting finding that declared prevalence actually, increases over time, whereas the actual prevalence is pretty constant at 2%. Right? So it seems scientists are better in declaring that data are available, but they have not improved in making it actually available. There is also some subgroup analysis, if you wish. How does this how is this in clinical trials and not, let's say, observational studies or other fields of medical research? And actually, in clinical trials, the PIs are less likely to declare that the data are publicly available than non-trialists. So that was one of the findings, specifically referring to clinical trials. And when it comes to actual prevalence, actually neither group seemed more or less likely to share their data. So I guess you are all aware of this, that in medical research, it's pretty rare that data are shared. But we do have platforms to share data, and here are a few screenshots from the most important ones. There's Vivly, a global clinical research data sharing platform where you can ask for access to clinical trial data, where you can study metadata on the available trials they have. And you see they have, in this screenshot, already more than 8,000 clinical trial data available on that platform. There are also other platforms, Yoda, Clinical Research Data Sharing Alliance, Clinical Study Data Request. And there are, of course, technical requirements. You need common data standards, and you need to have data use agreements, which are standardized in a certain way. But these things are actually solved, I would argue, and you can actually connect to those platforms and ask for data to be reanalyzed. And this is a senior advisor from Vivli, from one of these platforms, and I found her slides on the internet. And just to reiterate, what are actually benefits of data sharing? Well, this would strengthen trust in the clinical research enterprise. It would honor the commitment of participants. It prevents repetitive trials and putting additional patients at risk because we can reuse existing data. And it enables new discovery and scientific insights by combining data from disparate sources. So that refers to, for example, individual participant data meta-analysis. So many reasons why sharing clinical trial data will be of benefit. Now, that was my very short overview in general about the topic. And now to this case study. The case study emerged because I'm part of this EU-funded doctoral training network, sharing clinical trial data, Share CTD. And you see here the locations of the principal investigators and the partners in this endeavor. We have also partners from industry, as you can see. And the goal really of this network is to train a new generation of biomedical researchers in clinical trial data sharing to implement open science in medical research. And there are several research projects in this project. Sorry if I'm a bit slow. It's very hot here. I don't have air conditioning in this room, so my brain is functioning maybe not at 100%. So there are several PhD projects on the impact of preparing data for sharing, or how to use shared data, as I said, in an IPD meta-analysis. So, and part of this network are so-called datathons. So you may have heard of the term hackathon, where you try to reproduce published results and you code it up again. And somewhat similar is the term datathon, that you use data and try to reproduce the finding. And what I will report are the results from this first datathon that occurred last year in this doctoral training network. And here you actually see a picture. So that datathon was taken place in Göttingen in Germany, and that was the picture of the group. So you see PIs and PhD students here of that project. Now, this is the output of the datathon. That's the paper that Benjamin mentioned already at the beginning, which is now published in Trials, Supporting Reanalysis and Reuse of Clinical Trial Data, a Case Study. And this reports what I will now briefly describe in the remaining minutes. So we were looking for data from a clinical trial where we could try to reproduce the analysis. That was actually more difficult than you might think it is, because it's quite often not a sufficient reason for having restricted access on one of these platforms, because these requests are evaluated by committees, and they want new research proposals. They are not so positive about a proposal where you say, I just want to check whether the published results are true, right? So we didn't succeed in actually getting data from one of these platforms. But then fortunately, a colleague of mine, Thorsten Hothorn, who was also an author here on this trial from 2015, alerted me to the fact that the data from this particular trial is actually available in one of his R packages. Right, and this is the trial we were then looking at here. So this was about locally advanced rectal cancer and certain treatments. for this type of cancer, a big multi-center open label randomized phase 3 trial, I think primarily conducted in Germany. So we received from Thorsten anonymized data in January 2025 in R format, and access was then provided to the PhD students on a closed cloud storage. All the PhD students were required to work reproducible with Git and Markdown in their analysis. And we also prepared a centralized data dictionary so that the PhD students actually understood the structure of the data. Right. And that's another picture of that datathon in Göttingen. That was actually a whole week where there were several sessions. For example, we had the senior author of that publication visiting us and telling us the background and the motivation for the trial. And then we had several sessions on biostatistical aspects of the analysis, because many of the analyses involve statistical aspects and also other aspects, which you see here in this table. So the datathon actually took place over a whole week. Now, what are the results from this study? We were actually building 5 teams. So we could define 5 teams of PhD students, in each team 2 or 3 students. 4 of them worked with R. So that's what's called reproducibility here. And the 5th team actually preferred to work with Python to do the reanalysis. So that's what we call a robustness check, whether using different software actually leads to the same result. And now in this table, you see that's out of the publication. You see the different outcomes we were looking at. So the primary outcome was a log rank test and a Cox proportional hazards model for disease-free survival. And then table 1, table 2, table 3 had to be reproduced. Figures had to be reproduced with Kaplan-Meier plots, and so on and so forth. And we reported the results in a qualitative manner, where R stands for reproduced, P stands for partially reproduced, and N stands for not reproduced. And you see on a brief look that actually that endeavor was fairly positive. So we were actually able to reproduce most of the results, or let's say the teams were able to reproduce most of the results. Some teams had perhaps a bit more problems, and you see some footnotes here that indicate certain issues with the reproduction. So for example, one footnote here means that the median age in the control group was not reproduced across teams. But in principle, that was quite positive that we were able to reproduce the main findings of the different results in that publication. However, this endeavor, looking back at it, came with a bunch of limitations, and we actually mentioned those limitations in the publication. And I think it was a little bit also our naivety when we started that project, that we didn't think too carefully how to actually set it up. So it was more done in an exploratory manner. Looking back at this datathon, we should have actually pre-specified quantitative reproducibility criteria from the start to better define what does it mean that we are able to reproduce a hazard ratio of 0.79 or not. And that involves aspects like rounding and how many digits do you want to report your results. So you see here in this table, some teams report the hazard ratio with 2 digits, 0.79, 0.79. Team 3 actually with 6 or 7 digits. Team 4 even with more digits. Team 5, that's the Python team, actually has 0.80. So is this now still a reproduction or not? 0.80 rather than 0.79. So that is a bit unsatisfactory looking back, that we just did this qualitative summary and not a quantitative summary based on pre-specified reproducibility criteria. But in a sense, I mean, this is what you would expect, because I think we were one of the first groups who actually did this in such a multi-team event to reproduce results from a clinical trial. The other limitation, I think, which should also be mentioned, is that the data we used was actually analysis ready. So it was already pre-processed. And so we didn't get the actual raw data that you would get from your clinical trials unit, right? And because a lot of pre-processing, as you all know, happens between raw data and analysis ready data. For example, the definitions of censoring or the definitions of events will enter here. And so I guess this analysis would look different if we would have had the analysis ready data set and not the raw data. And finally, another limitation was that those teams were not really acting independently, because we trained them jointly. So they had the same trainings and they were also talking to each other during the datathon. So in a sense, these results that we obtained from the different teams have been dependent. But still, we believe that that was a fruitful and worthwhile exercise. So to summarize, reproducing the findings of an RCT, I think, is feasible and provides meaningful scientific value. You can validate the original findings. You can reveal discrepancies that warrant further investigation. And of course, to do so, availability of data code and the SAP, the statistical analysis plan, is vital, as is appropriate reporting. And that brings me actually to the next slide. Some of you may be aware of this already, that the reporting guidelines, Spirit and Consort, have actually had updates last year. So Consort 2025, Spirit 2025. Here you see a screenshot of the Consort guidelines, and the same new entries actually are in the Spirit guideline. And the new entries are on open science, right? So here you see suddenly there's an entry open science, and there is a question whether the trial protocol and statistical analysis plan can be assessed. Number 3, and number 4, where and how the individual de-identified participant data, statistical code, and other materials can be accessed, right? So if you start a new trial and you are supposed to fill out this Consort form, then these questions will be asked also to you. Good. So there is some progress, at least in the guidelines, to accelerate open science. And this is my last slide. So further reading that I can offer on sharing clinical trial data. So from the Center for Reproducible Science and Research Synthesis here in Zurich, we have a few primers actually, where we give summaries, sharing clinical trial data, clinical research data sharing in Switzerland in a nutshell, and also conducting individual participant data meta-analysis. So those are short, 2, 3, 4 pages long, and give you summary information on why and how to share data. And there's also information from the SCTO network, sharing of data from clinical research projects. And also related here is the latest primer here on dynamic reporting. So that is more about working reproducibility with Markdown or Nitter or similar tools when you do an analysis or a reanalysis of a trial. And with this, I would like to stop and open the discussion. And if time permits, I actually have another slide, but only if time permits. It's not so important. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Leo. That was very interesting and I think very relevant for the audience here. And I actually take the liberty, I'm sure there will be many questions, but I take the liberty for one comment and one brief question. So my comment is, it was interesting to see that Python and R do deliver slightly different numbers. which is very interesting to see. Not surprising, but interesting. And the question is, can you briefly elaborate on the effort or time these researchers required to actually reproduce these findings? Was it easy, or how easy was it to reproduce time-wise, effort-wise?
Oh, it was quite an effort, actually. So I think they did it not just during that week. I mean, that was the primary time when they did it, but also afterwards. They finalized their reports, and also, so I don't remember exactly how much time it took. It might be mentioned in the paper. I can't remember, but
Right.
I think it was quite some effort, really.
But it was not something done in a few minutes or so. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it was quite involved, right? So you have to reproduce all those tables and figures and so on and so forth, and that's quite a job, right? So no, it was certainly a demanding task. And the
Thanks.
other question about differences between Python and R, I mean, in a sense, it is to be expected, right? Because every statistical method has, often a few options that you can set or not set. And then depending on the option, you get slightly different results, or depending on the numerical optimizer, your hazard ratio might look different. And so the variation between software, I think, is to be expected. And I think the range we saw here, 0.80 rather than 0.79, is not really varying, but is what I would expect personally.
Sure. Thanks. So we have a couple of questions. I think Eva was first.
Yes, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. I mean, the last big study I was involved with was a Pan-Asian study, I think 28 different countries, including China. The primary data was coordinated in Singapore. So, I mean, it's an incredibly complex environment. We have subsequently spent more than 6 years trying to get data sharing agreements to do some sub-analyses and some translational ctDNA analysis. And at every level, it's incredibly difficult. National, cantonal, even between universities. And one of the problems is that the PIs often move on, and then it's really unclear who owns the data, if indeed they ever owned it. So would you comment on some of those factors?
Yeah, thanks for your comment. Yeah, I think that's really an important aspect, that data may simply not be available because the PI has moved, right? I just learned actually last week here from the Clinical Trials Center here in Zurich that, of course, they collect the data and they do all the data management. But once the trial is finished, I think 2 years later, they basically give the data back to the PI and clean their records, right? So that means the data will no longer be available through the CTU or CTC, but you have to go back to the PI. And of course, this is not how it should be. And it's what should be done is that when the project is finalized and when the paper is written, at the same time the data should be prepared and put on such a platform. Of course, with restricted access or embargo, there are several aspects that you can do, that you can use to make sure that the data will not be openly available. But then it's prepared, and there should be a data access committee that evaluates requests and makes it available then to people like you who want to do secondary analysis, if I understood correctly, in your project. Right.
Yes, then we have Kimberly.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. It's really interesting. I enjoy this topic a lot, and I'm curious, based on your first example where you bring up this paper that was retracted because they made a really simple mistake, in an ideal world, a reviewer would already have caught this. And so at what point do you think reviewers should even be responsible for saying whether or not the study is already reproducible before it even gets published? Because it seems it would really be a regime change of really a lot more work for reviewers, but it would be the best point for anyone to be able to actually truly check that the analyses are reproducible.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree that in an ideal world, the reviewer should identify such an error. But in this case, or in all clinical trials, I guess it's quite difficult, right? Because the reviewers don't have access to data and they don't have access to code.
Yeah, but they should, right? Ideally.
Yeah, ideally they should have.
We're saying we support that any study that gets published should put all their code and data out there. There's no way you can truly peer review a study if you don't have access to those things.
Absolutely, but the reality is that this is not the case, right?
Yeah.
There are a lot of editorials and papers who argue that people should share code and should share data, but it's not happening currently.
Yeah. Do you think it will ever happen?
It's happening in other fields. I mean, for example, bioinformatics.
Yeah. So I was in bioinformatics before.
Yeah, so you cannot publish in bioinformatics, I learned, without sharing data and code already at the review stage.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
And also in economics, apparently, data sharing is now quite common because journals require it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it would help also that the journals sort of push for this. But yeah, I guess there's so many legal and anonymity issues.
Absolutely, but in the medical field, there is still a large resistance and reluctance to do this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
I think there was a hand raised from Michael, who probably wanted to make a comment on that, I assume. Michael, are you around?
I'm here. I was actually, thank you. First of all, thank you for the very interesting talk and a very relevant talk. I mean, apart from, of course, agreeing with everything that was said, and by the way, to the last comment, last question that was raised, another question might be the role of AI now in reviewing code and things, which might actually work faster, of course, depending that the code is available. But that might make the life of reviewers, in a sense, a bit easier if that would be allowed. But I do want to bring this into a slightly maybe lower level, and on a question at to Leonhard on the level of how much is this potentially an older generation issue, and can we do change or try to make change from a bottom-up approach? So we work with the university, with the students, PhD students are doing a lot of the hands-on work actually, and things like these data-thlons that you described and everything that might be even just on dynamic reporting, even just on reproducible processes, might be ways to do it to bring a mindset change in the students that are the future researchers for later. And would you see that this might be the changing point that we should look for?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is what we try to do here with the Center for Reproducible Science and Research Synthesis, right? So we do not just do research, we also give training, and we give courses in good research practice and working reproducible with dynamic reporting and other things. These things are part of our courses. And the young generation, as you said, they are keen to do this. They want to do good science, right? So they want to adhere to these standards. And so I think what you said, that this might be a generation problem, I think is partly true. Of course, there's a particular issue with clinical trial data, and that's privacy issues. I mean, as I said at the beginning, the patients, the trial participants, they seem to be not so concerned about this. It's quite often an argument that comes from investigators that they cannot share because of the risk that the data might be identified. But I think that explains the particularly low rate of sharing data in clinical trials. But on a more general perspective, I fully agree that training the young generation is the way to go. Thank you.
So we have Inej next.
Hey, Leo, thanks for the great talk. I was wondering, since preparing data sets, as you mentioned, anonymizing, writing documentation, access, all these require so much time and effort. Who should be bearing the costs of this? So should it be in the original trial budget? Should it be funders? Should it be journals, sponsors? That's the key problem.
That's also a very important point. Of course, in the current scientific environment where we just need to publish and publish and publish, researchers may not have the time to properly prepare the data, right? That's what you just said. And so because it comes with cost and it will take your time, right? And so one solution is, I think SNSF now offers for every grant proposal up to, I think, 10,000 francs for data management. So you can ask for data management in your grant proposal, 10,000 up to 10,000 francs, and then you can hire a data steward or somebody who actually takes care of the quality of the data and making the data available to fair standards or other standards. And so I think there's also a change in mindset, and the funders make money available for this. That wasn't the case 10 years ago. And so I think there's also progress, but the progress is slow.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
Prof.
Anish.
Yes, so I wanted to bring up the elephant in the room, which is pharmaceutical and for-profit companies who run the majority of clinical trials. You know, they even retract things from submissions to regulatory bodies. So I can never see that they, you know, they would just use a commercial in confidence argument, I presume, to say that they can't share any of this. So then you would have a two-tiered system where you have even more burden on the academic trials that are already underfunded, and industry just, you know, hides behind or has this protection of this, you know, being a corporation with a commercial outcome. Any comments on that?
Yes, that's an important distinction between academic and commercial trials. Actually, if you go to this platform Wively, most of the clinical trials which are shared are from pharmaceutical companies. So actually, the academia is who is not sharing. It's the pharmaceutical companies who they share their data, maybe because they have to, but this is the data you usually get, right? If you look at the participant, I think there is a on Wively, you can see who all contributes to Wively, and mostly those are pharmaceutical companies. And you may wonder why is this the case? And I think one reason is, I think if they submit a new drug to the FDA actually requires access to data and code. This is not required by the EMA, but the FDA requires this.
Would it be biased, though, that perhaps they only share their positive trials, or you know, that they select which trials they share?
I didn't understand the question. Say again.
I said, then if that's the case, is it that they really are sharing all their studies, or just select ones, you know, that are, again, favouring their commercial outcome?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I haven't seen a systematic review of what is actually shared and what not. So it might well be that only the positive ones are shared and the others are not. Yeah, good point. So, but still, it's actually quite interesting. My feeling is the industry has much more money to hire data stewards and statisticians and to do this on a real professional basis, also the data management. And so I agree with what you said earlier, that academic trials are typically underfunded, right?
So we have 1 minute left. There's actually one comment in the chat we haven't addressed yet. I'm sure, Leo, you know Malte Elsen and his Error project, where they basically pay reviewers. It's more a comment, but maybe you can briefly elaborate on maybe such an approach would be something to try for clinical trial data as well, specifically.
So which question is this? Here.
Or up.
Yeah, I think this Error is a tool that acts on publications, on PDFs, and checks whether, for example, the p-value fits the confidence interval, if I'm not mistaken.
Error is the initiative that they pay experts to review papers again and find errors in the papers.
This is where the experts are paid. I remember now. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And what's the question about this?
So in your case, the question is, would it be something to, I mean, if there was funding available to pay experts to review published clinical trials to find irreproducible or incorrect data analysis in clinical trials, if that would be something interesting to follow up as a scientific project?
Well, yes and no. I'm not so sure about, whether they really need monetary compensation. I think, we have PubPeer. I'm not sure if everybody knows PubPeer, but PubPeer is a platform where everybody can comment on published papers. And PubPeer is quite often used to flag problems with papers up to research misconduct. And so if you spot something in a paper which can't be true, you can just go to PubPeer and publish this. You can publish this as anonymous participant, that nobody will see your name. And this is now the tool actually to report on problems with publications. So I think that's a bit similar to this ERROR project. I think the ERROR project is more ambitious, and it has this monetary compensation, but I'm not sure if you find, monetary compensation for the exponentially increasing number of papers in the medical field and elsewhere. Right.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Leo, again for taking time today. That was really relevant for us. And read Leo's paper if you have more questions. And Eva, do you want to say something?
No, I mean, maybe we should do a project looking at what data is on there and what data is not. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
Fantastic talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.